will start the video on, but maybe later on I might cut it off because at times the bandwidth gets consumed because of that.
Hi. In fact, your audio is still not very clear, Dhaval, and I only hope your audio is still not very clear. So I'm just hoping that.
Okay, is it better now? So let me just turn off my video.
Okay.
Is it done?
Yeah, you can. I mean, probably switch off the video if the audio gets better by that.
Yeah, but is it better now?
No, not really, because I think in fact I'm getting a pop-up saying your network bandwidth is low. So. So we have 2 minutes to go, and I think there are already a few attendees that have already joined us.
Hi, am I audible now?
Yes, Dhaval. I think it's better. It's better now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm connected through my phone as well.
Oh, great.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah, I think the phone sometimes seems to
much
be
better now.
Better device. Yes. Fine. Then I think we'll just wait for a couple of minutes because it's still not 11 on my clock. So.
Yeah, it's still 10:59.
Yeah. So I think we'll wait for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll I think just wait for a couple of minutes, and of course welcome all to all the participants who are already on the call. Thanks for joining on time. So we will just wait for a couple of minutes so that we have some more people to begin with. Yeah, so I think Abhishek, we can I think start, I believe. So because it's 11:01, and obviously I don't want people who have already joined us on time to wait anymore. Yeah, Dhaval. So I think I will join and I'll just give the opening remarks, and then I will hand over the floor to you.
Yeah, you can start, Mr. Nam. You can start.
Sure, thank you. So good morning to all of you. A very warm welcome from Team MoneyStream. I would like to thank Dhaval for accepting our invite to come to this webinar today. So Dhaval is a director and portfolio specialist at Morningstar Investment Advisors India. For me, it's a mixed feeling to co-host this webinar today with Morningstar. Many of you may not know, this is MoneyStream's first webinar, and which is why I'm very excited. However, of course, when I look out, the economic environment is anything but exciting. So the objective of at least what I had in mind for having this webinar today is twofold. Firstly, I want to understand, and of course from Dhaval and to the benefit of all the participants, as to what is the right approach to investing in markets which rewards the investors, and what is that strategy that has stood the test of time. Secondly, and probably more importantly, given the current turmoil in the economy, both domestic and global, how does an investor really play the market today? Because I think that is a $1 million question. Of course, we will also have a Q&A session at the fag end of the webinar. My only request to all the participants will be to kind of park your questions either during the webinar or on the webinar if you have some question, or on the presentation, either during the presentation or on the presentation if you have any questions. Please do park your questions in the Q&A chat box. We will have an opportunity to ask Dhaval our questions post his presentation. Since he has a presentation for us, I think so we will go through that first. And then, meanwhile, you can obviously park your questions in the Q&A chat box, and then we will open up the floor for a full-fledged Q&A. In fact, Dhaval has, very generously promised that, yes, we will address all the questions, and, that we don't have to really hurry up with things. So with this, Dhaval, it's over to you. Without much ado, I would like to, hand over the floor to you.
Thanks, Ram. I mean, thanks for that, brief sort of introduction. And thanks for inviting us, to talk with your clients as such. I'm sure it will be a pretty interesting, session today. And just a sort of quick introduction at my end before we sort of, go on screen and I share my screen with the presentation as such. I look after investment management for Morningstar in India out here, and I've been with Morningstar for more than 5.5 years now. Overall, I've spent about 22 odd years in the financial services and the investment sort of space as such. Prior to Morningstar, I was with Axis Bank for about 6 years. I had helped set up the investment advisory desk for the wealth management and private banking business. Prior to that, about 3 years with ICICI Bank, heading the financial planning desk again for the wealth management business as such. And prior to that, about 6 years in the bond markets, as such, so dealing in sort of government securities. What I'll do is I'll probably, if you give me a minute, I'll just share my screen. I think there's a slight problem with the bandwidth, so if you don't mind, I'll turn off my video. I think that might help save a little bit of bandwidth. So if you just give me a minute. Yeah. So, I think either Pradyumna or Abhishek, I think you'll have to make me the host because I'm unable to share my screen right now.
Well, I made you the host.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm still receiving the same message. Just give me a minute. I think technology at times acts a bit funny when you don't want it to also. Just a minute. It still is throwing up the same message. I don't know what the reason for that is. Just a minute.
Dhaval, by mistake, I made your mobile thing as a host.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah, if you could just change that, yeah.
Okay.
Have you changed it, Abhishek?
Pradyumna, can you just a second? I'm not able to do that because
We'll
you're
not
the
be
host.
able to do that Dhaval, because you are the host.
From mobile, how you will change back to us or anybody?
Dhaval will be only just a second. Wait, I'll do it.
You are the. You can just
Yeah,
make.
I'm doing it right.
Yeah,
It's
not a
done.
self.
Done.
Yeah.
Dhaval, can you try right now?
Yeah, just give me a minute. Yeah, I'll just try. Yeah, now it is enabled. Is my screen visible now?
Not yet, Dhaval.
Not yet.
Okay. Maybe we'll just give it a few seconds. There tends to be a lag, between sharing the screen and it being visible. But so till that happens, just to sort of kick off the session, I think like Ram rightly put it, that today probably as investors, all of us are concerned in terms of what you should do in the markets. With so much of news flow around whatever is happening around the world, in India, related to COVID and and the economy and so on and so forth. How should you react to all of what is happening around you? Should you sort of sell your investments and sit on cash, or should you buy more? Should you stay put vis-a-vis your portfolio or no? So that's something that we'll try and sort of address today. I hope my screen is visible, although I think it says it has started screen sharing. So obviously as investors, I think on most occasions we tend to hear mostly about extreme scenarios, right? The media tends to talk of either looming market doom or imminent market growth, and typically while obviously media houses have that incentive to draw viewer attention with very extreme bullish or bearish predictions, these views may be a distraction from an investor's point of view if you're looking to follow a particular investment approach. At times you may be very tempted to make significant or radical changes to your portfolios based on these headlines, but to our mind it is important to recall some basic sort of fundamentals that will help you keep your plan on track as such. The first guideline as such that I would think of is to drown out the noise, right? So what this essentially means is that media outlets, every day you wake up, you see screaming headlines across different sort of media outlets that markets are due to crash, the economy is in real bad shape, and so on and so forth. But typically what we've seen is that the media outlets that scream the loudest are not always the most accurate. And the reason for that is that market movements are very difficult to sort of predict, right? And the fallout from attempting to time the market in response to one of these predictions can be sort of pretty dangerous per se. So that's one thing to keep in mind is you obviously should you keep updated with whatever is happening around you? Definitely you should, but to the extent one can not do that, say, on a continuing basis, I think that will be more helpful. So in other words, you don't focus too much on what's happening sort of around you and all the time, and then use that to try and manage your portfolio or try and make predictions about how markets will move. The second guideline is look but don't stare, right? So we think it's definitely important for investors to know what's happening in their portfolios, and obviously short-term market movements can be quite volatile, but we clearly believe that while the probability of realizing a loss within any given day is high, the likelihood of actually realizing a loss historically has decreased over longer holding periods. So what this essentially means is that as your investment horizon tends to sort of increase, the probability of making a loss tends to sort of reduce. But if you look at your portfolio on a day-to-day basis, obviously in periods like this, you'll see the values having come down quite significantly as such, right? So we clearly believe that periodic review of your investment portfolio is necessary, but you shouldn't let short-term swings affect your view of the future as such. Just to check at my end, is my screen visible?
No, not at the moment.
No?
Yeah, now.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so final point. Maybe what I'll do is, if you just give me a minute, I'll. No, I don't know if I share the presentation with someone, they may not be able to share the screen because I'm the host. So maybe we'll continue like this. So the third point that I'd like to make out here is that as an investor, you should stay focused on the long term, right? As an investor, you sort of probably created a financial plan to meet or address your long-term goals. Probably along with your advisor or along with Ram out here, you've created a financial plan in a way. You've set down investments in line with that plan, and which are specific to your goals and your risk appetite as such. Although it doesn't sound exciting, but it's the most sensible approach is to stick to that investment plan, and that's probably the best solution in our view to help you meet your long-term goals per se. Clearly we believe that investors who attempt to time the market run the risk of missing periods of exceptional returns, and this could lead to significant adverse effects on the ending value of your portfolio. Now, what you see out here on this particular image out here, essentially what we've done is we've shown investments in the Sensex and how it has grown sort of over a period of time. So we've started with an investment of about 100,000 rupees or 1 lakh rupees in the year 2000, and then looked at if somebody had stayed invested, how would that investment look like at this point of time. And this the ending value also considers the fall in the market, which we saw in March. In April there has been a slight bounce back, as we've seen. So 100,000 rupees invested has grown to about 6,27,000. So that's about 6.2 times kind of a growth over this time period. Obviously, during this period, we've seen sort of, multiple sort of, drawdowns or falls in the market. For instance, in a 2000, just a minute, there seems to be some problem with the, yeah. So, in the year from about 2000 to 2003, we saw a significant fall in the market that was on account of, the dot-com crash. And essentially, markets at that point of time came down by about 40 to 50%, right? Subsequently, we saw, a sharp rise in the market. We saw, the value of this particular investment peak at about 3,87,000 in early 2008 or so. During 2008 again we saw a sharp crash in the market, essentially that was on account of the global financial crisis. So the value of that particular investment from about 3.9 lakhs or so came down to about 1.5 lakhs. So there was a correction of more than 50% in the value of the investment. Since then there have been multiple periods of drawdowns in the market as well. But despite all of that, the value of that investment in the Sensex has grown to about 6.27 lakhs, like I said earlier. If you compare this to a different scenario, for instance, for an investor who during a significant market correction, if they moved out of the markets or they exited the markets, they sold off their investment potentially at some losses, and then they sort of stayed in cash for a year. That particular investment, which is the dark blue line that you see out here, that investment, so they essentially moved to cash for a year and then reinvested back into the market. So somebody who exited, for instance, somewhere during the correction in the markets in 2008 or so, and moved to cash, like I said, for a year, that investment would have grown to about just about 3 lakhs or so. And the third scenario is where somebody on fear, with the fear of making further losses in their portfolios, they again exited the portfolio or their investments in the 2008 kind of period, and they stayed in cash for the entire period. So this investment grew to only about 2.48 lakhs or so. So clearly it appears that staying invested has paid out, has sort of rewarded investors sort of over the longer term. Obviously in the previous slide we saw that a pure stock portfolio might be quite sort of volatile. It can fluctuate a fair bit. There can be significant drawdowns, but a balanced portfolio obviously would tend to be slightly less volatile. So when we talk of balance, here we are referring to a 60-40 portfolio, which is investing about 60% equity and 40% cash. Now this portfolio obviously would tend to be less volatile, and in that sense it would sort of mitigate some of the risks associated with a stock only kind of investment. Now this image, what we've done out here is we've looked at how this balanced portfolio has performed during these financial crises, right, and for periods after that. So starting from, and here we've picked financial crises that have affected only India, probably like the 1992 Harshad Mehta scam. For those of you who studied history of markets or were investing in markets would recall, this scam did have a significant impact on markets at that point of time. If you look at the shorter term periods like 1 month, 3 months, even 1 year kind of performance, in a lot of cases a 60-40 portfolio has also corrected a fair bit. I mean, not just during this period, but for most financial crisis that was to sort of follow. And but if you look at how this portfolio has performed over a 3 to 5 year horizon, in particular a 5-year horizon, generally the portfolios have sort of recovered a fair bit. So essentially it means that the market has recovered strongly over the longer term and tends to sort of recover post some of these financial crises, and these crises are also fairly severe, right? Whether it's the global financial crisis in 2008, like we saw earlier, saw a market fall by about 55 to 60%. But despite that, after 5 years, of this particular crisis, the portfolio did recover, pretty well, from that point of time as such. So clearly, we believe that, fear and uncertainty may lead investors to sell their investments during tough times, which could put downward pressure on prices. And trading because of these emotions can be detrimental or can be negative to a portfolio's value. By selling during downward price pressures or when markets are correcting, by selling at that point of time, investors might realize, short-term losses. And, furthermore, this also gets compounded as the investment, as the investor would tend to sort of hesitate to get back into the market and probably missing out on some or all of the potential recovery. And that's what we saw in the previous slide as well, that just being out of the market for 1 year, right, impacted the performance or the value of the investment in a significant way, right? So because that 1 year, which was the period in 2009, saw witnessed a sharp bounce back in the market. And, so therefore, the lesson here is that, patience and staying invested does pay sort of dividends. And the other perspective out here is that, diversification can also limit losses during turbulent times, as we're seeing out here. The drawdowns or the fall in the market is lesser, than a pure sort of equity portfolio. And one of the main advantages of diversification is reducing risk over the long run, although it does not necessarily improve return. Stocks obviously offer the potential for higher returns, but the downside risk can also be extreme. So therefore, a diversified portfolio can help mitigate such extreme swings sort of in investment values as such. So, just looking at this particular image, I mean, here essentially, what we're trying to do is to talk of the cost of market timing, right? And a lot of investors believe that if they are able to successfully time the markets, they can avoid losses in the markets, right? But time and again we see that it's very difficult to time the market successfully over longer periods of time. So you may get it right on a few occasions, but over longer periods of time, typically it's very, very difficult to sort of do. And investors who attempt to time the market obviously they run the risk of missing periods of exceptional returns, leading to significant adverse effects on the ending value of the portfolio. Just talking of this particular image, we've looked at the daily returns for the Sensex over the last about 20 years, right? And this is about 5,000 odd trading days. And if you stayed invested for all these days, if you stayed invested in the markets, in the Sensex for over this time period, the annualized return that you would have generated would be about 9.1% or so, right? But in an attempt to time the market, if you missed the 10 best days in the market, your return would come down, to about 5%, right? That's a significant fall in the annualized returns. On an annualized basis or on an annual basis, one would have missed out on about 4% of returns from, the Sensex as such. And if you missed the 50 best days, your returns would actually be negative 4.5%, right? So that's a significant, just on account of missing the 50 best days in the market, your returns not only come down, but they actually turn sort of negative. So, clearly, the stock graph essentially illustrates that the risk of attempting to time the market over the past 20 years, by sort of, showing the returns investors would have, adhered to, would have achieved if they had, missed some of the best days in the market as such. Although the market has exhibited tremendous volatility on a daily basis, as you can see from the chart, at the bottom, the fluctuation in returns are pretty wide on a daily basis. But over the long term, investors who stayed the course were sort of, rewarded. There is an attraction to market timing. There is an appeal to market timing. But, but by trying to avoid, like I said earlier, by trying to avoid periods of, poor returns, one might end up missing, periods of positive or strong returns as such. And timing is obviously difficult, like we said earlier, and unsuccessful market timing can lead to a significant sort of opportunity loss as well. So, here we will looking at, the risk of stock market loss over a period of time, right? So, those stocks obviously are considered, by many to be fairly sort of, volatile and risky investments as such. But, the long-term gains that have been generated from the market, clearly demonstrate, have demonstrated that they offset short-term losses, for a long-term investor. So I'll just talk about this image. What we've done out here is, we've taken a 30-year period starting from 1980. In fact, it's almost close to a 40-year period up to 2019. And we've split, the observations into 3 buckets. So we are looking at 1-year returns on top. Then we've looked at 5 years annualized returns and the 10-year annualized returns. So if you were, and each of these periods, we've tried to point out, the periods with gains and the periods with losses. So if somebody was a 1 year, had an investment horizon of 1 year, typically, there was a probability that, you would have made, losses on 25% of the occasions. So what this means is over this time period, over the last about, close to 40 years, there have been 25% of the period, which essentially is about, 8 to 10 years, where you've seen, losses on an annual kind of a basis, right? But if your horizon is extended a bit further, if it gets extended to about 5 years, the probability of making a loss has reduced quite significantly. So the second graph out here talks of, 5-year annualized return that you would have generated, and and out of these, how many periods, would be where you would have made a loss. So there are about 36 odd, 5-year periods out here that we've included in this graph. So these are overlapping kind of periods as well. And out of these 36 periods, only 3 periods, showed a negative return as such. And then if you, for a 10-year kind of horizon, there were practically no periods when, there was a negative return. So there are about 31 such periods out here. These are again overlapping kind of periods. over this about 39 to 40 year kind of a horizon, and there are no observations of sort of negative returns as such. So clearly it's important to understand that as with other investments, you can experience losses from time to time when investing in the stock market. Short-term losses can even be expected from fixed income investments. So it's I'm sure some of you are witnessing it unfortunately at this point of time in some of the fixed income investments. Though they are less risky than stocks, with a long-term investment horizon, however, losses could potentially be sort of reduced. So that's the message that we're trying to that's coming out from this image out here. Again, just to reiterate the earlier point, investors who attempt to sort of time the market can run the risk of missing periods of exceptional returns, and this practice may actually have a negative effect on a sound sort of investment strategy. So just to sort of talk a little bit more about what we're seeing out here, what we've done is we've taken the same 40-year period, and we're looking at two things out here. One is we are looking at annual returns, that what was the return for that particular calendar year, and secondly, we're looking at annual returns for that calendar year if you take out the best month. So annual returns minus the best performing month in that particular calendar year, what would your returns sort of have been, right? So in fact, there are about I would say about 8 to 9 such periods where by virtue of trying to time the market, if one had missed out on the best month in that particular year, the returns would have turned sort of negative from positive. So just to sort of illustrate the point out here, if you look at a period such as 1992, so the dark green bar that you see on top is the return if you had stayed invested for the full year, right? So which was just about close to 40%, slightly lower than that, maybe about 37-38% or so. But if you had stayed invested for the full year, you would have made a return of about 37-38%, like I said. But by trying to time the market and trying to avoid, say, a probable period in which there might have been a negative return, if you miss the best month, if you had missed the best month in 1992, your return would have actually turned negative. So you would have missed out obviously on your full, for the entire year, your return would be a negative about 1.8% or so approximately. So similarly, there are several such periods, ranging from 1980, 82, 83, 92, which I mentioned right now. Even a year like 1994, the returns turned negative because the best month was missed out. Even in more recent periods, 2002, 2013, and in fact even 2018 was also a period when the positive returns actually turned negative as such. And clearly, the reason for that is because it's difficult to time the market consistently, and that's something that we feel probably as an investor you should try to avoid sort of doing in your portfolio as such. Obviously, one way to sort of mitigate some of these risks, and which we saw earlier in the previous slide where we spoke of a 60-40 kind of a balanced portfolio, is to diversify a portfolio. And a very simple expression to sort of describe diversification is don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? And this is what probably diversification in a way means. And the reason it tends to sort of help mitigate risk is that in a portfolio is because all the asset classes or each asset class doesn't move up and down together. All asset classes don't move up and down together at the same time, right? And essentially a typical diversification strategy would involve holding more than one type of investment, such as stocks, bonds, or cash in a portfolio to help reduce risk. And an investor can diversify even within each of these buckets, right? So even within your stock holdings, one can buy a combination of large cap, small cap, or even international stocks, and within their bond holdings across short-term, long-term, government bonds, and so on and so forth. And the reason this tends to sort of work out in terms of price in reducing risk is because these asset classes like stocks, bonds, and cash generally don't react identically in different economic environments, right? And to just illustrate this, even as we talk this year, we've seen markets correct, since the start of the year. But a couple of asset classes that have done well are fixed income and gold, right? Fixed income in particular, if you are invested in good credit quality portfolios, it would have sort of done well as such. So clearly, that's on account of the underlying fundamentals for each of these asset classes differing, is why fixed income obviously generates coupons and interest, and whereas equity, as we know, is driven more by earnings growth and dividends as such. So therefore, the source of cash flows is different, and therefore the way they react to different economic scenarios also tends to sort of differ as such. Clearly, diversification may not eliminate the risk of experiencing investment losses, but by investing in a mix of sort of investments, investors may be able to sort of insulate their portfolios from major downswings in any particular sort of investment. And the benefits of diversification essentially become more apparent over shorter periods of time. In fact, even if you look back at the 2008 kind of financial crisis, 2008-2009 financial crisis, you would see that investors that were holding a mix of stocks and bonds in their portfolio, they experienced lesser sort of fluctuations, or the level of fluctuations were lesser as compared to investors who had portfolios that were composed only of stocks as such. We clearly believe that investing in the international landscape, it might be useful to analyze historical performances, by asset class and by region as well, right? We clearly believe that it's impossible to predict which asset class will be the best in a particular given year. And, this chart essentially talks of, or this image essentially talks of how various asset classes ranging from, as you can see out here, Indian equities, emerging market equities, developed market equities, US equities, gold and fixed income, how have they performed on a calendar year-wise basis over the last about, 11 to 12 years or so. Now, and just to illustrate the point.
Sorry, Dhaval, we are unable to see the screen actually.
Okay. I think because I've shared it, just let me stop share and share again. I think at times there seems to be a slide, so I think it's just starting now again in terms of screen share. So it'll just take a few seconds probably for it to come on. So maybe just I'll talk through this till the way it is, till the time the screen becomes visible and you're able to see the slide. Again, 2008, as we saw, Indian equities corrected significantly and along with global markets. But if sitting in early 2008 or late 2007, a lot of people were thinking that emerging markets had a strong run from about 2004, 5 up to 2007. A lot of people who would be thinking that Indian equities would continue their strong run, or emerging market equities also would continue their strong run, were clearly disappointed, in 2008 when these markets sort of corrected, quite significantly. It's taken a little longer than I anticipated. Are you able to see the screen now?
Not yet, Dhaval.
Okay.
So we can see that it started to share the screen, but yet to appear.
Yeah. Okay. Let me stop and start again. Give me a minute.
Meanwhile, do you think, Dhaval, we should take a few questions or would it be a good idea to take it at the end, all of them?
I think let's just wait for a few seconds. If it still
Sure,
doesn't
sure.
come on, we can take a few questions.
Fine.
Yeah, I think we can. Apologies for that. I think there is a slight issue with the bandwidth. I was anticipating that today being a Saturday, probably lesser people would be sort of using the bandwidth, at least from a work from home perspective. But I think that doesn't seem to be entirely right. Yeah, so we can probably take a few questions then, Ram.
Sure, yes. So I think to begin with, of course, there was the first question itself was a little bit contentious in terms of what we saw in the what we saw playing out with with some of the schemes of Franklin and the overall debt scenario. I know probably it's like leaving the cat among the pigeons, but then I think that was one of the first questions that I got. So
okay.
So do you think
okay. So do you want us to? I think now probably
the screens are back.
Abhishek is probably sharing his screen.
Oh, great.
So maybe shall we continue with this and take up the question later on?
That's fine.
Yeah?
That's fine. Yes,
so
yes.
So like I was trying to illustrate that it's sort of very difficult or practically impossible. If you look at this particular slide, you'll see that different asset classes have done well at different points of time. Even if you look at periods such as like a 2012, right? Indian equities was probably the best performing sort of asset class at that point of time in that particular year. But if you look at and if you thought that the performance will continue into 2013, Indian equities turned out to be the worst performing equity market, at least among major markets sort of across the world. So whether it's US equity or European equity, all of them did better than Indian equities in 2013. And even if you look at how fixed income has played a role in portfolios, and like we discussed also earlier, in a period like 2008, most equity markets worldwide, like we said, did see sharp corrections. But if you look at the performance of asset classes such as gold and fixed income, they did pretty well, in that particular scenario. So gold tends to do well, in scenarios where there is significant economic uncertainty, and if there are significant volatility in financial markets. And even for over the last about year or so, we've seen a similar performance from gold as such. And so clearly it indicates that it's impossible to predict performance top performers in a given year, and it would be beneficial to hold a diversified portfolio across probably countries and regions, and that also gets highlighted from a point if you look at, say, the performance of developed market equities or US equities over the last about 5 to 10 years. They've been among the best performing markets. In fact, over a 10-year period, US equity markets have done better than most emerging markets, including India as such. And so therefore there would be some merit, we would think there is a fair bit of merit in holding a diversified portfolio that invests not only in domestic asset classes but also international asset classes such as US equities. The other benefit that it provides is obviously a hedge against the currency, right? So investments in international equities, like in the case of gold, would tend to benefit if there is a significant depreciation in the currency, which we've even witnessed over the last few months as such. So just moving on. Yeah. We spoke a little bit earlier about how a diversified portfolio might work out well. Out here we've taken 5 different asset mixes, ranging from a very conservative kind of an asset mix of about 20% stocks, 80% bonds, going up to an aggressive portfolio or an asset mix which is 95% stocks and a 5% bond kind of allocation. And obviously, as you can see from this chart, is that the difference in the allocations obviously has a significant impact on long-term outcomes as such. And obviously, if you look at the red line, which is the 20-80 portfolio, 20% stocks, 80% bonds, has been less volatile. So the line has not. Obviously, the investment in in that particular portfolio hasn't moved, hasn't been hasn't fluctuated as much. But if you look at the dark blue line on top, which represents the 95% stock and 5% bond allocation, has been much more volatile. But the end result indicates that it has over about 15-16 year period that we've taken here, it indicates that the ending value is higher for the aggressive sort of portfolio. Obviously portfolio selection in terms of whether one should go for an aggressive or a balanced or a conservative portfolio would be driven by one's investment horizon and one's sort of risk appetite per se. So just moving on to the next slide. And then just to illustrate this a little bit more, here we've taken the performance of different asset classes separately. In the earlier slides we saw performance on a calendar year-wise kind of a basis. Here, if we were to take 100,000 rupee or a 1 lakh rupee investment in in each of these 5 asset classes that I mentioned here, which are Indian equities, cash, bonds, developed market equities, and emerging market equities, and then plot them over a period of time and look at how they performed over the last about 16 odd years or so. One can see that emerging market equities and Indian equities have generally performed better. The ending values are relatively sort of higher as such. Although over the last few years, like I said earlier, developed market equities driven by the US in particular has sort of caught up, and the ending values are relatively similar. But clearly, the equity asset classes have outperformed bonds and cash. Although, as we can see from this chart as well, that the equity asset classes, particularly Indian equities and emerging market equities, have been sort of fairly volatile. But this also illustrates that if there's no risk that is taken in the portfolio, the reward would probably also be very low or may not sort of exist as such. And certain assets tend to deliver higher returns due to the higher risk premium that they offer, to compensate investors for the underlying risk of that particular investment, which is what we can see from emerging market equities as well as such. So just moving on to the next slide. So in a way, this sort of summarizes what we were talking of earlier. So I'll just sort of skip through this, and we've discussed each of these sort of elements. Just a couple of sort of updates. Let me just try and just give me a minute, please. So how do we implement some of these solutions? Abhishek, would you have some slides around our managed portfolio process, the valuation driven asset allocation, and the managed portfolios as such?
Yeah, just a second. Yeah, just a second.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just talk a little bit about how do we sort of follow some of these things that we were talking of till now in terms of staying invested, and what is our version of staying invested in the market, and how does this sort of translate into an investment proposition as such. So just give us a couple of minutes, please. Meanwhile, let me try and share my own screen.
Sure.
Yeah, if that works, that's fine.
Because I think while the screen comes up, just for the benefit of all participants, Morningstar does have a managed portfolio program, I think, under which there are model portfolios, which I think Dhaval is going to talk more about. So a lot of the advice that comes out of Morningstar, obviously you will see them actually get implemented in some of these model portfolios. And yeah, I think yes, I'll let probably Dhaval speak more on that.
Yeah. So a little bit about our philosophy in terms of how do we sort of make investment decisions at our end, and how do we manage money for investors as such. So typically we've laid down a set of 7 key investment principles which sort of guide us in our investment thinking, in our behavior, and in our decision making as such. So the first principle is that we put investors first, right? So we believe that firms that put investors first, the investor would tend to win over the long term, and the firm that is managing those investors would also tend to sort of succeed. And so that's a principle that we follow across Morningstar as an organization. It's not just in the investment management group. So whenever we are creating any products or solutions or doing any research, we are thinking of how it will benefit the end investor per se. Next is we are independent minded. So we think that if you have to generate performance that's superior to the market, that's different from the market, you have to think differently, right? So at times we may be contrarian to the market, so we may be acting differently from what everyone else is saying, so to say, but we are not afraid of being contrarian as long as it's sort of backed by our investment views per se. The third is we are long-term investors. Clearly our horizon for investments tends to be at least 5 to 10 year kind of a period, and our views across asset classes also tend to be for those kind of periods at a minimum. And by being long-term investors, we are able to ride through the volatility in the market, which you will see from time to time, right? And we are also able to identify opportunities at different points in the market cycle. So that's the benefit of being a long-term investor. Next is we are valuation-driven investors. So we clearly believe that the price that one pays for the value of a security or an asset class is the key driver of the performance that you will generate over the long term. So a lot of people think that, all right, that we are long-term investors, that you are a long-term investor, how does valuation matter? We've seen it time and again that even for longer holding periods, the valuations at which one has made investments into equities or bonds, for that matter, does have an impact even over long-term returns, over 5-year, 10-year periods as well. So therefore, valuation is a key component of our investment process and our decision making per se. Next is we take a fundamental approach. So what this means is that we spend more time in doing fundamental research versus technical analysis. So we spend more time in trying to understand the cash flow drivers for different asset classes. How is the fundamental growth for equities going to play out over a period of time? So we spend more time in trying to analyze that rather than doing technical analysis or technical kind of research. Next is we strive to minimize costs. We clearly believe that high costs impact investor returns over the long term. So therefore, our endeavor is to try and minimize costs in the various investment solutions that we offer to sort of clients. This can be by way of selecting instruments or securities or funds which where the expense ratios or costs are low. It can also be by trying to manage transactions well to avoid over transacting in the portfolio, and therefore trying to minimize costs. And then finally, we build portfolios holistically. So, which we spoke of earlier in terms of it's not just about adding multiple securities or funds or asset classes to the portfolio, but essentially trying to add asset classes that will react differently, to different economic situations is what we try and do, when we, construct the portfolio. So just moving on, to the next slide. Like I was saying earlier that, valuation is an important component of our sort of decision-making kind of process. And a lot of people look at valuation when they're picking stocks. So I'm sure, some of you might be investing into stocks directly. And when you're investing in stocks, you would tend to look at sort of the valuations of the stocks that you're picking. But we think if it's relevant at a stock level, it is also relevant at an asset class or at an index level, right? So when you're making a choice between investing in, say, in large caps, mid caps, small caps, or the choice in investing, across different markets, we think, valuation plays an important role out there as well. So just quickly talking about this chart, this image out here, the pink line in between is the fair value of a security or an asset class, right? The fair value, you can think of it as the earnings, say for a Sensex or a Nifty or a BSE 100, right? The fair value or earnings of these, market indices tend to grow gradually over a period of time. Over short-term periods, there might be fluctuations, but over longer-term periods, they tend to be, relatively steady as such. The fair value doesn't change, as much as such. But what tends to fluctuate a lot around the fair value is the price, right? We refer to this as Mr. Market. It tends to fluctuate a lot around the fair value, and which is what, we are witnessing in the markets as well. You saw, good run-up in the markets over the last few years, particularly in large caps, and, since March and April, again, you've seen a fair bit of sort of volatility. We clearly believe that when markets or the price is trading below its fair value, the potential for returns is greater and the potential for losses is sort of lower, right? And when markets are trading above their fair value, the potential for returns tends to be lower, whereas the potential for losses is greater. And why does this happen, or why do we think in this way? Is because over a period of time, we believe that valuations revert to mean. So in very simple terms, we think that, what goes up must come down in that sense. So it's a simplistic way of putting it, but, that's in a sense what we are saying, that, these valuations tend to revert to their means over the long term. And you see that again and again, play out in the markets. So what we try and do in our portfolios is make more investments, when the asset class is trading in or below its, around or below its fair value, and reduce allocations to that asset class, when it's trading sort of, above fair value as such. So, just sort of, moving on. So how do we sort of, put this into action, and in what manner do we really, utilize these views and the valuation-driven asset allocation approach as such? So, like Ram mentioned earlier, we've launched a set of 4 multi-asset managed portfolios in India. What this essentially means is that, as the name suggests, we are investing across different asset classes in these portfolios. So these asset classes include domestic equity, fixed income, international equity, and potentially gold. Currently, we don't have allocation to gold in these portfolios. If we have a strong view, we could, add it in as well. Each of these portfolios is suited for different risk appetites and different investment horizons. As you can see out here, a balanced portfolio is suited for a horizon of about 5 to 7 years. Obviously the risk level or, the risk reward of a balanced portfolio will differ from that of, an aggressive or an aggressive plus kind of portfolio. A growth portfolio is suited for 7 to 10 years, and aggressive plus portfolios are suited for a 10-year plus kind of a horizon. So these are not lock-in periods, but these are, suggested or suitable horizons for us to, for the portfolios to be able to generate sort of optimal kind of, returns, looking at the level of risk that each of these portfolios would sort of, undertake as such. Another difference between these 4 portfolios, or at least the first 3 and the 4th portfolio, is that the first 3 portfolios are invested across domestic and international assets, whereas the 4th portfolio, which is the aggressive plus portfolio, is invested only in domestic equity and fixed income, kind of assets as such. To talk a little bit more about the portfolios, the underlying investments in these portfolios are going into, direct plans of mutual funds. So potentially we could invest into either, passive funds as well, which is index or ETFs. At this point of time, we are invested in actively managed funds through the direct plan sort of route. Another aspect about, the portfolios as such is that the allocations in each of these portfolios would be managed, actively as such. So based on our valuation-driven kind of views. And as you can see out here, we've defined ranges within which each asset class within that portfolio could potentially move, right? So say in an aggressive portfolio, the domestic equity could move in a range of about, 55 to 85%. Similarly, fixed income in the range of about 0 to 30, international equity from 5 to 35, and gold from in a range of about 0 to 15%. So the actual allocations would be based on our views on that particular asset class, at a particular point in time. And further, each of these asset class, the allocations would be split into further sub-asset classes. For instance, domestic equity is split into large, mid, and small, fixed income into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And within international equity, we are looking at 3 regions, which is US, Europe, and Asia Pacific as such. So just to talk a little bit more
Dhaval,
about
can
in
I
terms
just,
of how the
Dhaval,
Yeah.
excuse me, Dhaval.
yeah
Could
I
you
can
just
hear
go
you.
back to the slide, please? Yeah, can you go back
Yeah,
to the
sure.
previous slide?
Yeah. This one you're referring to this one?
The one, no, the one, yeah, this one. The next one.
No, you're referring to the slide with the valuation-driven asset allocation, or
No, the one where you showed active allocation,
Where
where you
our
had the different.
strategies are there.
Yes, the next one.
The portfolio.
yeah,
Yeah.
this one?
Yes, this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Dhaval, frankly, I'm trying to wear the hat of a customer where I'm asking this question, because to someone
Sure.
who's a typical, like an average investor, they would be more concerned with how this information can be digested, right? So if I have to equate it to the life stages of an individual, is there a recommendation that Morningstar and you have as to, okay, if I'm a young adult, maybe I can take an active, aggressive plus way of portfolio, or let's say if I'm slightly more settled and a family of 2 children, maybe I could go to the active growth. Is there a recommendation you have if I were to equate it to the life stages of an investor?
Yeah. Typically, the way we approach it is through a risk profiling kind of process, where we try and assess the risk-taking capacity and risk-taking willingness of an investor. Now, the capacity is typically, and if I were to link it to the life stage, because life stage, although one is, like you gave the example, is somebody who's very young, right? Who's just maybe 25, 30 years old or so, and obviously, probably going to work for a pretty long time after that. But such an investor could have two situations, right? One is they don't have too many goals coming up over the short term, right? So therefore, they could go with an active aggressive or an aggressive plus portfolio, like we said. But you can't discount the fact that somebody who's younger might also have short-term goals, right? So therefore, the investment horizon becomes very important, right? So we see a lot of cases, to give a counter sort of example as well, is that we see cases where somebody, for people who retired, right? They're adequately provided for. They have enough sources by which they are able to generate regular income. It could be investments in real estate, it could be investments in debt instruments or whatever. And therefore, they have certain portion of the portfolio which they feel, they don't need regular liquidity or regular income from, and therefore they can invest that portfolio for the longer term, and even from an inheritance point of view, to pass it on to the next generation as well. So therefore, I would think that it is probably more important to see it from that lens, from what is your investment horizon, because that could vary for people even within the same life stage, like you said. And so therefore, the investment horizon and risk appetite, we think, are the most important sort of drivers when it comes to picking a portfolio. Does that answer
Sure.
your question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. So just sort of moving on quickly in terms of how do we actually manage the allocations in the portfolios as such, and when would we sort of hold more cash and when would we hold lesser cash? Typically, in a low risk market environment, our cash levels would tend to be low. Now the question is, how would you define a low risk market environment, right? At least for us, it's a period after which, say the equity markets have disappointed and valuations look reasonable. So when markets correct, we think, and if they've corrected significantly or sharply, we would think that, that environment is a low risk market environment, because the probability of further losses has probably come down, right? And in that scenario, we would tend to sort of increase allocations to growth assets such as, equities, both domestic and international equities, based on their, relative attractiveness. Whereas in an environment where we think, markets have generated very strong multi-year gains and valuations are looking stretched, is when, we would be a little bit concerned, and we would qualify that as a high risk market environment typically. And that's when, our allocations to equities in our portfolios would sort of tend to come down, and the cash levels would sort of, tend to increase, as such. Just a quick snapshot about the investment management group that we are part of as such globally. This team within, or this group within Morningstar is responsible for providing, investment advisory and investment management solutions to investors, and that is typically done through advisors as such as, Ram. And obviously we are part of this particular group that I'm talking about. Globally we manage and advise about $177 odd billion worth of assets. Over a period of time, we've built, a fair bit of strength in terms of resources and the capabilities as such. So we have about, globally about 90 odd investment professionals whose day-to-day job is to track different asset classes, to build views on different markets, and to sort of manage money and construct portfolios as such. So that's a fairly sort of large team. And the way the group is structured, we are able to leverage our global resources as well in the local market. So we, for instance, in India, work closely with our Australian investment management team, which is the largest team within the Asia Pacific region, to build, different solutions for the local market as such. So we get, assistance from, or we are able to leverage our global resources and also ensure that there is, consistency in terms of how we operate in different markets. And, it shouldn't be that, all right, we do a lot of things in different, in global markets, but in India, we're doing completely different. So there would be an alignment in terms of the processes that we follow. Obviously, there is a fair bit of local expertise in place, to build, the local element in terms of, managing portfolios and building recommendations as such. So I'll just sort of, end with this interesting quote from Sir John Templeton. And he had said that, to buy when others are despondently selling and to sell when others are euphorically buying takes the greatest courage but provides the greatest profit. So this, in a way, sort of summarizes our own thought process and our own approach and in terms of a valuation-driven asset allocation and so on and so forth. And this is something that we sort of associate with, to a fair degree as such. So I think I'll stop here and, we can take questions now.
Yes, Dhaval. So thanks a lot for the detailed presentation, Dhaval. I'm sure, I think, because our participants, when I look at them, because obviously when the registrations came in and when I see the participants on the webinar now, I see that they come from diverse backgrounds in terms of their understanding of markets and at the stage of investor life cycle they are in. So thanks. I think you have been, I think, probably able to cater to most of them, if not all. So thanks for the wonderful presentation, Dhaval. And
sure.
Yeah, and in fact, yes, I have a number of questions that are already there in the chat box and also the Q&A box. So let me just take it up one by one. So I think the first question that I had was, or rather is from Sandeep Lal, and he's basically wanting to know that, as an investor, he's quite comfortable with equity as an asset class. I think what probably has shaken him and probably a lot of other investors is what happened on the debt side recently. And of course, I'm sure you are aware of the Franklin episode that played out. So that has kind of shaken up the investor confidence. We have had a lot of sound bites coming in from the industry and also from the company. But we just wanted to probably, I think Sandeep probably wanted to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure. So I think, in a way, obviously, what has happened was quite unfortunate. And, clearly we've seen that, probably this crisis is more of a liquidity crisis rather than a credit crisis at this point of time, at least. So what that means is that it's not as if, all the papers that Franklin or some of the other fund houses have been holding are all bad and therefore, they haven't been able to recover any money. It was more, this crisis was more driven by the fact that, investors suddenly rushed in over the last few months to redeem, a lot of their investments into, particularly it started with Franklin in a bigger way in that sense. So, and they weren't able to, sell the papers because a lot of these papers, the lower credit quality kind of papers tend to be illiquid, bond markets. In fact, if I were to look at what's happening elsewhere as well in other markets as such, in other markets as well, particularly liquidity for corporate bonds and for lower rated credit has also dried up quite a lot. And that tends to happen in market scenarios such as these, where, there is, the liquidity tends to sort of dry up. And out there, some of the central banks have stepped in and said that they will buy bonds. Obviously, they will be a little bit concerned about buying low credit bonds. So again, yields in those markets for those, high yield, low credit bonds have gone up even further in several cases. So it's not a scenario that's only, restricted to India. Obviously out here, one of the challenges was that Franklin was running similar strategies across about 5 to 6 of their funds, right? So probably in my view, at least, if this was limited to say 1 or 2 funds, the situation would have been more manageable. Because it was about 6 funds amounting to about 25 to 30,000 crores across these 5 or 6 funds is what has created, this bigger challenge in terms of them being able to, make redemptions on time. Having said that, the step that they eventually took, to stop redemptions, to stop fresh investments, and to wind down the schemes, probably is in the best interest of the investor, because then they are not required to, sell the securities, as we call it, at a fire sale. So fire sale means that, whatever price you get, you sell them for. So at least they'll not be forced to do that, and they would tend to sort of wait for, either maturities to happen or coupon payouts to come in and then start repaying investors as such. So from an investor point of view, I think, although obviously as an investor you might have to wait for a fair period of time, depending on what the recovery period at their end is, and it might take time for some of the money to come in and for you to sort of get back your investments. One also has to keep in mind that because these are low credit rated instruments, most of them are low credit rated papers, there might be a chance that some of the underlying issuers themselves may be facing problems, and they might cause some further delays as such.
Okay.
I mean, that's sort of a snapshot of the current scenario. But another thing that I'd like to add here is that as an investor, how should you really, when you're constructing your fixed income portfolio, how should you probably think about different holdings in your portfolio as such, or different categories of funds or different types of funds as such. So I think one thing to sort of keep in mind is to look, one is a lot of people get attracted by the higher yields available on certain funds, right? So they simply look at the yield and then they think that, all right, I'm getting a higher yield in this fund, I'll go ahead and invest out here, right? But that may not be the best approach. So there is no free lunch, right? So if you're getting a higher yield on a portfolio, there will be some element of risk in that particular fund or portfolio. So that's something that's very important to keep in mind, is just don't look at the yield and invest in the portfolio or in a fund. Try and understand along with your advisor, what is the underlying investment, how is this fund offering a higher yield as compared to everybody else in the market, right? So like I said, there is no free lunch. There is some additional risk, or there is some additional factor that is driving that higher yield or higher, so-called return. And make no mistake, a lot of investors have made reasonable returns over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years as well, investing in some of these funds. The other thing to keep in mind is your own risk appetite and your investment horizon as well, right? So that's also equally important, because, funds that are investing in lower credit, tend to carry higher risk as compared to funds that are investing in AAA rated paper or government securities. So, that's something to keep in mind as well, that, what is your risk appetite and what is your investment horizon. If you need money after 1 or 2 years, it may not be a good idea to invest into, funds with low credit quality as such. If you've got a longer horizon and a decent risk appetite, maybe you could, look at that. One final point around that is, is also try and look at the economic environment or cycle that's playing around. So if you look at and even some of this is visible just when you read the newspapers, right? Over the last couple of years, we've continuously been seeing that banks continue to face NPA issues. So they are still facing rising NPAs. The economic environment seems to be slowing down, right? And it's not only now, but over the last couple of years as such. So such an environment, typically, mutual funds also that are investing in lower credit paper might face certain challenges. So I would think keep some of those things in mind. Don't just look at the yield. Understand your risk appetite and your investment horizon, and try and, along with your advisor, try and assess the economic environment. Is it an appropriate time to take allocation to such kind of funds and strategies?
So Dhaval, just as a follow-up question, so what would you say to investors who are already who are there in debt schemes now, and they are just looking at what is happening around, and of course, given the stress that we are seeing in the overall economy, so do you think there is further pain that is going to be there, and people move out from? Because I think what happened in Franklin is that there seemed to be low credit paper even in duration-based schemes, and I think so. Like you said, if you are really not having a very close look at the underlying papers, you might actually be taken by surprise, or rather, this in this scenario, it shocked many of them. What do people do who are already in debt now? Do they really, especially low duration, short term, do they move to liquid? Even people are raising questions about liquid as well. So
Sure. So I think one has to be a little bit careful before taking any decision to exit funds. The reason is that not every fund house, not every fund, not every category can be painted with the same brush, right? So you have categories such as banking and PSU, you have categories such as corporate bonds, even within categories such as ultra short duration, or like you said, low duration, or even short term. Most of the funds, I would say most of the funds in these categories tend to have superior credit quality portfolios. So, typically invested in largely in AAA and probably, AA plus and AA rated kind of, underlying holdings. So there are very few funds, I would say a limited number of funds that are invested in or largely invested in low credit kind of, paper as such. So therefore, like a banking and PSU, like I said, that kind of a category, a minimum of 80% gets invested into bonds issued by banks and public sector entities, right? There are several funds that are investing, 95% plus into banks and PSU. So, those would tend to be, relatively safer. So I wouldn't just take a call just to exit all the debt funds and move to liquid or overnight. I would still, spend some time. Obviously, it's your investment. You should spend some time, sit down with your advisor and try to understand, does this portfolio, let the advisor explain, what are the underlying holdings in the portfolio? Is it predominantly a AAA rated portfolio? Is it a mix of AAA, AA? What is the proportion, and so on and so forth? So, I think it's important to do that to a certain extent. One may not go into try to understand each issuer or each particular holding in the portfolio, but at a slightly, which may be difficult for a lot of people to do, but even get a broader sense of the AAA, AA kind of holding in the paper. And like I said, some of the categories like banking and PSU, corporate bonds, they are relatively, anyways, because of the way the category is defined itself, they are primarily invested in, AAA or AA plus rated kind of papers.
Sure. So moving on to the next question, Dhaval. So I think this is again quite a number of people asking this question. So this is from Vikas Sagar. He's asking, hi, with this market condition, should we retain our investments made on mutual funds from last 6-10 years? Because I think as of today, when they see the portfolio, it's almost, it's of course in the red versus what they have invested. So I think it's a question that I think is a voice of many. So they're saying for last 6-10 years I have made investments. So I'm seeing it in the red. What do I do?
Sure. So absolutely, that's what we've been trying to address all this way through, in terms of the importance of staying invested at times. When you're investing in the markets, if you're investing in equities, there is undoubtedly there will be periods when you see significant volatility, right? So if equity markets were all to move in straight lines, nobody would put money in fixed deposits, right? If everything were to just move up, so you'll always see some bit of volatility from time to time. So I would suggest as long as an investment horizon is still at least 5 years and above, and as long as your risk appetite tends to change, but as long as your horizon is long term, I would think one should stay invested. Obviously, within that, one can sit down and review the underlying holdings in the portfolio, right? What sort of funds are you holding? Are those still do those still sort of merit an inclusion in the portfolio or no? So that's something that you can do. But I would definitely think that one should and repeatedly we've seen that all through history, and if you saw some of those slides as well, it did speak of the importance of staying invested. The other thing to keep in mind, which we were also trying to demonstrate in the presentation, was that markets at times can bounce back very sharply. I am not at all suggesting, don't take me as if to say that, all right, next 3-6 months are going to be excellent for markets. We are not trying to predict that. But history shows that at times markets can bounce back quite sharply as well, right? So if you were to, exit the markets and stay in cash thinking that, things could get worse, I mean, it may work out the other way as well. So therefore, if you're a long-term investor, I think, if you've got investments in equity markets, largely speaking, I would think that, you should sort of, stay invested and focus more on the long term, what your long-term goals are. Is your plan aligned to that goal or no? I think is what probably you should, focus on.
Sure. So moving on to the next question by Pramod. So he asks, is there a timeline for the current volatility to persist due to the crisis? So he's wanting if there is a timeline really that you can talk about. 6 months.
I wish I could, right? I wish we could all. I mean, I'm sure there will be a lot of people. If you read up, people will put out all like 2020. This is the Sensex target index. Although last couple of months I haven't heard too many people say that. Yes. In the good periods you have so many predictions that come up. Year end, this is our target. I mean, we think it's like almost like the toss of a coin, right? So it's very difficult to predict. But having said that, given that markets have corrected significantly from here, the extent of corrections that you could see further in the market would be limited. You can't completely rule out that, all right, there may not be any corrections at all. But I would think that, given from the peak, you've corrected, 25-30%, you bounce back a bit. But then, you're still down, fairly down from peak. And even if you look at, for instance, segments such as small and mid cap, right? We didn't speak too much about that, but from early 2018, right, they've corrected by about 50-55%. There is a fair bit of correction that you've seen in the small mid cap space. So out there as well, we think further corrections might be sort of relatively sort of limited in that sense.
So I have another question from Atindra, who says, whatever SIP should we continue? They want to say we're buying in lesser price and hence continue. I think that's more or less kind of covered that yes, I think this is not probably the best time to stop your SIPs. Of course,
absolutely.
So moving on to the next question by Dhruv, it says, given the current fixed income scenario, I think I think he asked me to ignore this. Okay, so there's a question from Anil Lobo. I don't know if he's still on the chat. Okay, it doesn't seem to be there, but we'll still pick up the question. Is systematically moving your mutual funds or accumulation in SIPs to blue chip direct equities an option that can mitigate erosion of portfolio?
Not necessarily, right? So, stock investments are meant for somebody who's able to do, enough research or, has got people around them who can do, adequate research for them. Now, you look at so many blue chip stocks. I mean, you name them, so many of them have seen sharp corrections. You look at the auto space, you look at the infra space. So, and these cycles will change. Today it seems like, the FMCG or pharma is the darling of the town. But you look at how some of these stocks might have done over the last few years, may not be so great. So the point I'm trying to make is that, unless you have adequate time and resources to do research on your own, it's better to stick with mutual funds, right? Yeah. Within that, you could decide to tilt your portfolio to large caps, for instance, and have a lower tilt to small and mid caps. So that's a call that, you can take with your advisor based on your risk appetite and investment horizon. And probably, if at all you want to dabble, you could, maybe 5-10% of the portfolio you could put in direct stocks. But I wouldn't, unless you have the resources, like I said, I wouldn't suggest a big shift from mutual funds to stocks per se.
Sure. I'll just pick up one question from Prasanna meanwhile. He's asking, is it advisable to allocate to US equity funds at this point in time? And what is the best to take exposure to US based equity funds? That is his first question. There is another question that he's asking. Would you call gold a hedge or an investment? So you can take one of the first.
Yeah. So US equities, obviously forms a very large component of the global equity basket, right? So if you look at, global indices such as MSCI and so on and so forth, you'll see that, world indexes, you'll see, US equity forms anywhere between 50 to 60% of a global equity market index as such. So from that point of view, if you are an investor investing across global markets, then you should have some allocation to US equity. but I wouldn't suggest making a significant allocation because US equity markets have done pretty well over the last about 10 years. Even in this correction, there was a sharp correction in March, but they've also bounced back in the month of April. So from our point of view, we think that so we are sort of underweight US equities. So we have allocation in our portfolios, but it is lower than what it would normally be, right? So therefore, that's the approach we would. I would also sort of advocate that don't go all out just looking at historical returns. Valuations out there are still pretty high in many pockets of the market. And it is definitely not looking cheap. There are other options which are looking more attractive, or other regions like Asia Pacific and Europe. Again, Europe, you would think, all right, so many problems, the markets have corrected, but we don't think the current scenario will have an impact on long-term economic growth. So therefore, we are fairly positive on Europe and Asia Pacific as regions as such. And in terms of, I think a part of that question was also about how does one take that exposure?
Oh,
yeah,
yes,
no,
yes,
and the second part, yeah,
that's right.
So so there are a few US equity funds available in India through the local fund houses. So the same fund houses from which, or not all of them, but maybe several of them through which you buy domestic equity funds, also offer international equity funds like ICICI Prudential, DSP, Invesco, for that matter, even Franklin Templeton, they do offer international equity fund options as well. So you could take exposure through those. Unless one wants to buy stocks directly in those markets, then there are a few platforms available as well. But unless, like I said earlier, unless you have the resources, it's best avoidable, and it's best probably going through some of these funds as such.
Sure. And about the gold, whether it's a hedge?
That's a pretty interesting question, right? And if you ask most Indian, traditional Indian investors, they would say that gold is probably a great investment as such. So typically over history, it has been shown that gold performs two roles very well. So one is, it is a good inflation hedge against inflation. If you have very high inflation, gold would tend to do well in that kind of environment. The second is when there is a lot of economic uncertainty or financial market uncertainty, is when gold tends to sort of do well as such. So from that point of view, I would think it is probably more of a hedge. The reason is also because that gold doesn't generate any underlying cash flows, right? So from an investment point of view, unlike equities, where you could generate dividends, where there are underlying earnings, for fixed income instruments, you have coupons, that typically come in. Gold, unless you invest into the gold sovereign bonds, which are a good option for people who want to invest in gold. But otherwise, traditionally, other gold investments don't offer, any payout or a fixed coupon or a dividend or any such thing, right? So from that point of view, it appears to be, more of a hedge, and there will be periods when it underperforms also significantly, right? So if you look at from about 2011-12 onwards, so it did well before that up to 2011-12, but from there onwards for the next about 6-7 years, it significantly underperformed, most other asset classes per se. So I would think, maybe 5 to 10% allocation to a portfolio would be fairly adequate, for gold as an asset class.
Yeah, sure, Dhaval. So the next question is from Anusha. I think unfortunately, I don't know if she's there on the call, but I'll nonetheless read her question. How are the yields expected to behave further given the fiscal and monetary measures of RBI? And can we go long on bonds now? For example, RBI bonds.
That's an interesting question because, that's a debate that's ongoing in terms of, what's going to happen to the fiscal scenario and what's going to happen to the monetary kind of scenario. From a monetary perspective, obviously the RBI and the government are pretty keen that, interest rates remain low, right? Otherwise, it will defeat, their entire purpose of trying to, boost the economy and so on and so forth. To my mind, I think that's what they will, RBI has got different tools available like other central banks in the world. So they can, buy out bonds from banks through different routes like OMOs and so on and so forth. So I'll not go into that too much. But largely, I would think that that probably interest rates may not go up significantly. But if you ask me, I think at this point of time, we think equity markets relatively are looking more attractive as compared to fixed income markets. So from that point of view, we do have positions in our portfolios at the short term, medium term, and long term end. Long term, we are at sort of neutral. Even at the shorter end, we are at neutral. Maybe the 4 to 7 year bucket is where we are slightly overweight. But I think equity versus debt. I think largely equity markets are looking, given the corrections, they're looking, relatively sort of better than fixed income.
One more question from Mr. Ramesh Shivaraman. Basically, he's talking about your managed portfolios. If one were to have started investment, let's say last year, in the in the balanced portfolio with a 5 to 7 year view when started, with the current crisis, would that time horizon, investment horizon change for achieving the desired outcome?
Not really. I mean, because in fact, we've had some benefits in our portfolios because of the virtue of investing in. We were underweight equities when we launched these portfolios about a year ago. So that has helped us to a certain extent with the correction in equity markets. The other thing that's helped us is obviously our fixed income investments have also done reasonably well because we invested in conservative credit and we didn't go down the lower credit sort of path. As such, that benefited. And international equities also, although even European markets have corrected, but because the rupee is also depreciated, the fall has been lesser in rupee terms as compared to Indian equities. So our portfolios have also corrected, but the fall hasn't been very sharp. So if it were a balanced portfolio, I wouldn't think that the investment horizon needs to change significantly. So 5 to 7 year horizon would still sort of hold for that particular portfolio and for other portfolios also respectively.
So the next question again will be from just a minute.
And in the meanwhile, I'll just maybe elaborate a little bit on what I was saying earlier. When we say the investment horizon would hold is because when we build the investment horizons or when we try and identify what a suitable investment horizon would be for a particular portfolio, we try to consider what could be the maximum drawdown in a portfolio and therefore what could be the recovery period and therefore a period to generate an optimal return. So therefore, when we talk of the aggressive portfolio, we are talking of a 10-year plus horizon. So it keeps that in mind that because you have higher allocation to equity, it could potentially see, greater drawdown over short-term period. And therefore, so it factors in some of these scenarios that we are witnessing, also at this point of time.
Sure. So next would be Dhruv, I think, yes. So Dhruv is asking, what are the options for investment outside India? Rather, how? Okay, so I think, would you like to, I think you've already mentioned about the overseas funds with some of the AMCs. Is there anything else that you would like to add? What are the options for investments outside India?
So the other route is taking through the LRS, the liberalized remittance scheme that is available, through RBI. So that is the second route through which one can remit money abroad and then, make investments abroad as such as well. So I would say largely, and through that route, it doesn't restrict, investments. You could, one could make investments in real estate outside as well. And besides the traditional asset classes such as equity and debt and so on and so forth. So as such, that is another route that is available. And, besides the ones that we spoke of in terms of, funds available out here, in India as such.
Sure. So I think one more question from Vijesh is that is there an ideal diversification? Just a minute, I'm just missing this question. I think he would like to understand what is the ideal asset allocation. I think probably to beat market volatility. Is there an ideal ratio for diversification of funds? Probably it's a asset allocation.
Of funds?
Question. Yeah, of funds, diversification of funds.
Is it? Okay. So funds. So what it would refer to is that, what is the minimum or maximum holding that I should have in individual funds or individual schemes, right?
I think that might be one. Other could be, I think, between debt and equity. I don't know if it's an asset allocation question.
Okay, so maybe I'll try and address both.
Sure.
So I'll try and address both. like we were trying to say earlier as well, the asset allocation decision is based on two factors: your risk-taking capacity and your risk-taking willingness. And to an extent, like we were, like Anita had brought up also earlier, to an extent it can be linked to a life stage as well, right? But again, within that, it will be your horizon and your risk appetite. So longer the investment horizon, and if you have at least a moderate and above kind of risk appetite, I would, typically recommend a higher allocation to equity. It can go up to, 70, 80, 90%, depending on if your horizon extends beyond 10 years or so, and if you've got a decent risk appetite. If your horizon is shorter, like we said, say about 7 to 10 years, then, you probably can go with a 70-30 kind of a portfolio, about 70% equity, 30% kind of debt. Again, the equity, like we were talking, can be, diversified across domestic and international, large, mid, and small, and so on and so forth. And as your horizon shortens, obviously the allocation to equity would tend to be sort of, lesser as such. In terms of individual funds, typically the way we look at it is that we try and cap exposure or allocation to individual equity funds at about 17-18%. So we don't exceed that level in the portfolio. So, at times, there can be differing views that, all right, anyways you're investing into mutual funds, why do you need to have so many funds in a portfolio? The other perspective is that, funds at times tend to perform quite differently in different market cycles, right? Because the manager styles also tend to differ. So typically from our point of view, we would, cap allocation to individual equity funds at about 17-18% or so. I think you're on, yes. Ram, I think you're, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yes, sorry. So I think Prasanna has just one more question. He's just wanting to know your thoughts on active versus passive investing in India.
Yeah, so that's again a pretty good sort of, question at this point of time. This is a debate that's been ongoing for a while. In India, it's just started, maybe over the last couple of years. And I think the reason for that is that if you look at how actively managed funds have performed in 2018 and 19 in particular, mainly in 2018, for example, you see that, a lot of the actively managed funds, even in the large cap space, particularly in the large cap space, underperformed their benchmark, right? And that's where this debate in a way started in 2019, and also it was prevalent to a certain extent. So one of the reasons for that has been that if you look at the performance of the index or the stock market itself in 2018 and 19, particularly on the large cap side, you'll see that it was a handful of, if not a handful, it was a very small number of stocks. The typical, the HDFCs of the world, the Bajaj, Finance, Finserv of the world, the, some of the IT companies, and some of those kind of companies which did very well. Most of the other stocks didn't do so well. So what I'm trying to say is that the performance of the index itself was quite, concentrated to a few stocks, right? So therefore, as mutual funds, most of them would tend to hold a diversified portfolio of stocks, ranging from 40, 50, 60, and probably higher as well. So some of these funds underperformed because it was only these few stocks that did well in the market as such. So, but if one looks at the performance of actively managed funds over a longer period of time, and one way to do it, I think, which is more effective than just looking at trailing returns, is to look at calendar year-wise returns. So you should look at, that's the point I was trying to make. You look at 2018, you look at 2019, but also look at 2017, 16, and so on and so forth, previous years. You'll see that some of the better managed funds have consistently done well relative to the benchmarks as such, at least in these prior periods. It's been the last couple of years which has been a challenge, particularly in the large cap space. So, to sort of summarize it, I would think that at least in our portfolios, we are largely invested in actively managed funds. Probably as an investor, you can look at maybe, say out of an equity portfolio of 100 rupee, you could look at maybe, 10 to 20% allocation to passive. The remaining can still be sort of active. At least that's the view that I hold.
Sure, Dhaval. So I think one last question is from Murli. He says, I invested in certain funds in 2016 around June 2016, and after 4 years I see them in severely negative. It seems like even though we say longer the term, the probability of losses are lesser. It really depends on when you entered the market.
Yeah, so that's what we are saying. Rather than saying, when, I think it sort of to an extent depends on the valuations at which you made investments, right? So I think that is what is probably another way to put that out. So I would think, the valuations have driven, investments even over this kind of a period. Now, I don't know if is the question also about whether one should stay invested or
I think
what's the actual question?
Of course, the question, I think it's I don't know if more of an observation or a question, but I think if I am able to understand the soul of the question, I think he seems to be kind of disappointed with even a longer term holding is not probably yielding the kind of returns that one would expect, because then that is typical of most investors, because when we say long term investing and you stay with your holdings and all that, so people tend to get disillusioned when they see that even after holding on for a certain number of years, which in this case seems to be around 4 to 5 years, there's of course that can be always attributed to the current crisis, but and probably I think the rebalancing bit is something that I think a lay investor is always bereft of. I mean, it doesn't seem to be a question, but more like an observation that even a longer holding period doesn't seem to be helping.
No, it depends now. Obviously, if you look at it, at this point of time, obviously, if you're, from a 3 to 4 year horizon, or if you've invested 3 to 4 years ago, it doesn't look very great. But, like we are repeatedly saying that, for equity investments, you should have a horizon of at least, 5 to 7 years and above. So that's something to keep in mind. So what it means is that, you'll need to wait at times for the entire cycle to play out, and for you to be able to generate, optimal returns as such. And the other point I think which Ram was also trying to make is that is to hold a diversified portfolio and not just put all your money, if you've got, say a 5 to 7 year horizon, not put all your money in equities, but split it across, equity and debt as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we are more or less done. I'll just have a quick look if I have missed out something so that we can probably have our closing remarks as well. Just a second. Yeah, I think one last question from Vijesh, I think, which I did miss out. Yeah, so he's asking, how does one ascertain the asset classes as are good or bad value propositions? I'm really not sure if I'm getting him right. He says, how do one ascertain the asset classes are good or bad value propositions? So is it the evaluating?
Yeah. So I think obviously it's not an easy task to do, right? Therefore we've at our own end we've got very large teams trying to make that kind of assessment. But a few simpler ways in terms of trying to assess if asset classes are looking very expensive or very cheap is to try and look at if asset classes have done very well during certain for say the previous 3, 4, 5 year periods, if they've generated very high returns. So normally say from equities one would expect generally over the long term returns of about 10-12% or so. But if that asset class has generated say 20-25% kind of returns year on year over those previous years, then I think it might call for a little bit of moderation in terms of allocation or investment in that particular asset class. So all in all, I'm saying that one is you should probably look try and identify an expert who can help you and try to evaluate that. But if you want to try and do something on your own, I think these are some indicators in terms of asset classes that have done very well over say 3, 4, 5 year kind of period and generated above average kind of return. One should be a little bit wary about looking at those asset classes. The other thing when you look at asset classes also is to look at the fundamentals, right? So everything cheap is not value, right? That's a general that's something to keep in mind, that just because something is available, stock is available at a very low price doesn't mean it's very attractive value. So what it means is that you need to look at the underlying fundamentals as well. Probably I would recommend if since somebody is interested in doing that, you could read a little bit more about this. You could pick up a book, for instance, which was written by Benjamin Graham. It is called as The Intelligent Investor, and Warren Buffett has identified Ben Graham as his sort of investment guru as such, and it's a pretty it's a relatively easy read. So it's not a very technical kind of book. It's a fairly simple book in terms of, which explains, how different types of investors can go about, constructing their portfolios and so on and so forth. So, something like that would also be a helpful, measure as such.
Sure, Dhaval. I think one more question, and I think we are done with all the questions. So Dhruv says maybe a stock specific question, but is it really good to save cash to subscribe for LIC? It's due to come next year Q3, but given the current scenario, it could come in early. So I would also love to know from you, Dhaval. I mean, as to
no, I mean I would love to give an answer to that, but I honestly don't have an answer to that. But generally speaking, I think we know the kind of market share that LIC holds in the market out here in the insurance space. Obviously private sector insurance have been gradually eating away at that market share. Because LIC policies in a sense tend to be more costlier. So you look at term plans as well. I mean, tend to be more costlier as compared to most private insurers. But I think, being a government-owned company, people have that mindset that, it's much more safer and things like that. But one will have to look up the valuations at which the stock will be available. So that's again a question to keep, that's again an important point to keep in mind. It's not just the name, For people who've been in the market for a period of time, if you go back to a 2008 kind of period, I remember, there is this company called as Reliance Power, right, which came out with an IPO in 2007, 2008, and people, were queuing up to invest in that IPO, right? I don't think a lot of these people would have enjoyed the ride since then, right? So therefore, it's not just the name that is important. It's also looking at, what is the valuation today. Even over the last few years, you see many stocks have, from their IPO, prices have sort of, corrected, a fair bit. So one has to be a little bit careful. Even blue chip names, I wouldn't go down the path of naming specifics, but, even blue chip names from very large groups have seen, prices from IPO levels go down by even 40-50%. And they're still trading below those levels as well. So, one has to be a little bit careful, from that perspective.
Sure, fair point, Dhaval. So I think we are done with all the questions, and yes, thanks a lot, Dhaval, for patiently answering all of them. It's been actually quite a long call. I'm just seeing that we are almost we are clocking almost close to 2 hours. So and of course, thanks to all the participants who have remained. Because I know, of course, some of them, in fact, unfortunately, a couple of them had posted questions, but I think they had to log off because we had kind of given the 11 to 12 kind of blocked their calendar for 11 to 12. But fair enough. I think we will probably share with them the recording possibly. So once again, thanking all the participants for very patiently being available on the call. I know, of course, it must have been a little heavy language, and but still, I think you have patiently heard, and hopefully we have answered all, if not most, if not all, your questions. Yes, Dhaval, I think so. From our end, I think it's that's about it. Anita, would you just like to any closing remarks you would like to add?
Not really. I think Dhaval has already done a great job. So thank you all the participants. That's it. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you, Dhaval. Sure. Anything that you would like to comment, and then I think we can kind of log off.
No, I think thanks to all the participants at your end for joining in. I think it's been a pleasure at my end. I tried to keep the discussion as simple as possible.
Yes.
But if it's unfortunately been a little bit technical, I can understand that. And then thanks to Ram for giving us this opportunity to sort of interact with all of you. I think it's been a pleasure and good learning for me as well.
Sure, the pleasure is all ours, Dhaval. So thank you and your team for enabling us to have this webinar. And once again, thanks to all participants. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
All right.
Thank
Goodbye.
You. Goodbye.